On this edition of Let's Explore This, we are going to discuss Bryson City. Though called a city by name, Bryson City is technically a small town. It is, however, not only a town, but also the county seat of Swain County. In fact, upon the act creating the new Swain County, Joseph Keener and J.R. Dills were authorized to survey the county lines, and in 1871, Swain was formed from parts of Macon and Jackson counties. Before we set out to begin on how this small town of Bryson City was formed, however, let me first start by saying there does not exist a single document whatsoever that provides an in-depth historical account of the town. Therefore, this information had to be culled from a wide array of sources, including a number of articles, a couple of books, a couple of blogs, and a study list for a proposed historic district. So, let's get started. The elections for the new county officials were to be held on the first Thursday of June in 1871. The most pressing concern for the newly elected commissioners was the selection of a site to become the county seat. The name Charleston was selected, and on June 28th of 1871, the first court was held at Lucy Ann Robbie Klein's store in the small village of Bear Springs. And this store sign, it is likely a reference to that long-lost hamlet. Well, today, at least as of 2018, Bryson City had a population of about 1,710. In 2009, the population was 1,353, an increase of 26% over a span of 9 years. Between 2000 and 2010, the population remained relatively stable. And the Tuckasegee River, you know, the river that slices through the town, flows westward from its source, way over there in the mountains to the east. The river is, in fact, one of Bryson City's greatest assets. After passing through Bryson City and flowing around this here park, the Bryson City Island Park, the Tuckasegee flows southwestward for another 12 miles before emptying into the Little Tennessee River. And Fontana Lake, an impoundment of the Little Tennessee, covers the lower 11 miles of the Tuckasegee. The town itself, it is surrounded by the Great Smoky Mountains to the north, the Cowie Mountains to the south, and the Platte Balsams to the east. The boundary of the Nantahala National Forest passes just south of the city, and to the north, you can find the boundary of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Yes, folks, all of that, you can find it right here in Bryson City. But before this settlement named Charleston became the village named Bryson City in 1889, it was a tract of land known as Big Bear's Reserve, which was itself located in the same general area as a Cherokee village that had been ravaged in 1761 by a British expeditionary force under the command of Colonel James Grant. In fact, Native Americans have been living and hunting in the vicinity of what is now Bryson City for nearly 14,000 years. The village of Kichua which the Cherokee believed to be their oldest village, was located along the Tuckasegee River immediately upstream from Bryson City. In fact, it is said to have been very close to this area, as this sign can attest, often referred to as Governor's Island. In 1567, an Orata, or minor chief, from Quichua, is believed to have met with Spanish explorer Juan Pardo in the French Broad Valley to the north. Although Quichua was burned by American soldiers in 1776, the Cherokee continued to hold annual ceremonial dances at the site throughout the 19th century. Big Bear, otherwise known as Yonah, was a Cherokee leader who lived in the general area in which the present-day post office is located. According to Native American historian James Mooney, he was among the signers of the First Treaty of Tellico in 1798 and the Treaty of Pike's Purchase in 1805. And by the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw, Big Bear was confirmed, a reservation of 640 acres, as one of those living within the ceded territory who were believed to be persons of industry and capable of managing their property with discretion, and who had made considerable improvements on the tracts reserved. The mile-square tract for that area apparently included most of the flat land on both sides of the river, west of the mouth of Deep Creek, that is, the central portion of Bryson City. Later on in that same year, Big Bear, he signed a deed for the land, giving it over to a white man named Darling Beck. Well, what we have here is an issue of the Asheville Citizen-Times from January 11th of 1959. In it, we can find this article entitled, "Indian Twice Sold Land That Is Now Bryson City, Getting Only Horses and Wagon." It was subsequently republished, in part, in this 1960s-era book by Lillian Thomason called Swain County, Early History and Development. In it, Carl Fleming wrote this: "History has it that Beck, who evidently was no darling, plied Big Bear with giggle water and got his signature on a deed, which exchanged the land for a promise of $50. Big Bear claimed he never got the money, and about a year later, on November 25th of 1820, he deeded his 640 acres of land to John B. Love, perhaps the largest land speculator in the western part of the state at that time, in return for a wagon and a team of horses." A legal hassle commenced that made its way to the state Supreme Court in 1834, when the lower court's decision in Beck's favor was initially upheld. Love, however, was nothing if not persistent when it came to acquisitioning the land. In 1841, his title was ruled superior by the court. So, thereby, well, let's now move on to what Fleming noted in the conclusion of his article. Love, who came into possession of the land for a wagon and a brace of mules, turned a tidy profit by selling the tract to John Schuler for $2,500. So you see, folks, the land that Bryson City now rests on was technically stolen from the Cherokee. Big Bear did not simply sell the land, but was rather bribed. Bryson City was born out of bribery, apparently. Anyhow, The first pioneers that moved into Swain County were on foot and horseback, with scanty household goods on pack horses. Soon, covered carts and wagons were also used. The early families, they brought a few rifles, an axe, a hunting knife, an auger, and a spinning wheel. Kitchen items included an iron kettle, a few pewter plates, spoons and dishes. Other tools brought were hoes, plows, and saws. If there were to be grain and vegetables planted, these pioneers had to bring these with them. Of course, it is likely John B. Love and that Darling Beck were among such pioneers. They were the early settlers in the area, just after the Native Americans. The first job was to build a log cabin, much like this historic one located in the nearby Alarka vicinity, in which no nails were used, as they were not available. The cracks between the logs were filled with chinks and dobbins, and the chimney, it was usually built of stone, which was plentiful in Swain County. Many, if not even most, of such cabins that once existed in the immediate Bryson City vicinity, today appear to be long gone. When the Gibson family, which reportedly included former Senator Joshua A. Franks, moved into the region in the late 1870s, there were only 9 houses, 2 small stores, an empty store building, and a courthouse. In that first courthouse, it was nothing more than a small 2-story building located in the center of what is now the town square. From the point forward of those earliest of pioneer days, through various trades, Schuler added lands to that mile-square Big Bear tract, which were subsequently owned by members of the Burns, Bryson, and Klein families, before being deeded in 1870 to the commissioners of the newly formed Jackson County. When Swain County was formed the following year, it did so by meeting the state requirements of locating a site for the county seat and procuring the land by gift or purchase. Lots were drawn up and sold at auction. So now let us turn to this book from 1988, The Heritage of Swain County. In that book, according to studies done by Elaine S. Beck, the store owner in Bear Springs, in whose establishment the procurement meeting was being held, was a Mrs. Klein, a widow, who offered to donate 25 acres of her land to become the county seat, reserving 3 town lots for herself. The majority of the commissioners greatly accepted this offer. The acceptance was marred only by the resignation of N.S. Jarrett, who was disgruntled by the selection of Mrs. Klein's land for the new county seat. As a result of this agreement, much of downtown Bryson City, including the town square, was acquired from Lucy Ann Robbie Klein, the widow of Alfred Klein. The online site devoted to Mrs. Klein notes that a deed was prepared on July 7th of 1873 from Lucy Ann Klein to Frank Leach, chairman of the Board of Commissioners for Swain County, for a portion of the tract known as the Big Bear Reservation, for the purpose of locating the town of Charleston, on which to erect a courthouse, a prison, and other necessary public buildings, for the use and benefit of said Swain County. So, folks, Bryson City, therefore, started out as Charleston, which was incorporated in that name in 1887. 2 years later, the name was changed to Bryson City in honor of Colonel Thaddeus Dillard Bryson. Well, one reason for that name change was that mail intended for Charleston, North Carolina, it often went to Charleston, South Carolina. Yeah, so I can kinda see how that could be a problem. So, ex-Senator Joshua A. Franks was in the legislature at that time and introduced the bill for the change of the town's name. So, who was this Bryson character anyway? Well, there is this biographical sketch called The Bryson Family, written by Edwin C. Bryson. You can find it in this book, The Heritage of Swain County. Well, Colonel Bryson, he was born on February 13th of 1829, and he grew up on a farm in Webster in Jackson County. Little is recorded of his early life other than that. As a young man, he became interested in politics and represented Jackson County in the North Carolina General Assembly, and that biographical sketch goes on to list an extensive service record. He married Mary Charlotte Greenlee of McDowell County. Just when Colonel Bryson moved to the Charleston community, which at that time was a part of Jackson County, was not known to the writer of that biographical sketch. It is of record in September of 1868 that he acquired a large tract of land on the north side of the Tuckasegee River, which is now part of the town of Bryson City. So, Colonel Bryson, he decided to settle on this tract, where he built a large 8-room house. He became the first person to represent Swain County in the North Carolina General Assembly in 1871. So folks, where was that 8-room house? Well, not sure. But this here is a house related to the Bryson clan, the so-called Bryson House, only just recently restored. And I'll let this video clip explain it a bit more.
The historic Bryson House was built in 1929 by the grandson of the founder of Bryson City.
So, in her still very informative book, Swain County, Early History and Educational Development, Lillian F. Thomason noted that Colonel Bryson was a farmer, like most everyone else back then. He operated a merchant mill, grinding meal and corn, at the mouth of Deep Creek. And behind the mill, he had a sash shaw, which was used by the public on a self-serve basis. One did his sawing and paid in cash or a portion of the lumber, just as toll was taken for the grinding of grain. So, at the mouth of Deep Creek, well, that mill must have been somewhere in this area. Yeah, there is nothing like that here anymore, but who knows? Maybe the old wood of the structures can still be found here. So, look around, you tell me. I bet, if you do manage to find it, you would think it is just another piece of wood. Now, as you know, Swain County was organized by an act of the state government in 1871. Charleston, the first name chosen for the county seat, proved unsatisfactory. Apparently, mail was being misdirected to, that city on the South Carolina coast. So, renaming it would rectify that situation, and it would become an opportunity to honor Thaddeus Dillard Bryson, one of the town's primary benefactors. And 2 years after Charleston was incorporated in 1887, a new charter was granted, and in 1889 the name was changed to Bryson City the year before his death. Colonel Bryson, he was laid to rest in the Bryson City Cemetery, overlooking the town bearing his name. From that point forward, the mile-square village that became Bryson City was situated within a vast enclosure of ridges, partly in the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains, on the north side of this here Tuckasegee River, and partly in the foothills of the Cowies, on the south side of that very same river. And the river, it bisects the town, just about slicing it in half, with today its recreational allure. And Lillian Thomason, she goes on in that book to note that a town square was laid out on the south side of the Tuckasegee River, with the main street paralleling the river and extending an equal distance east and west from the square. A cross street intersecting this square, as did Main, extended across the river, which was spanned by a then wooden bridge as far as the local Presbyterian church. And that street, well, it was appropriately called Everett, of course it was. You see, Ep Everett was not only Swain County's first sheriff, but also one of the wealthiest and most influential figures during the county's early years. In about February of 1874, Ep Everett made the first recorded town lot sale, purchasing Lot 9. It stood on the south side of Main, adjacent to the town square, and across from where the courthouse stands today. And this road here, it is likely named after David Kimsey Collins, who made the second recorded town lot sale, acquiring his lot 2 months after Ep Everett purchased his. His lot, too, stood on the south side of Main, with the properties being bounded on the west by what is now Rector Street, and extended southward to what is now Bennett Hill Street. Now, folks, it is time for me to turn your attention to this building, the Chamber of Commerce building. You see, it was where this building now stands, where Mr. Collins built his home, store, and outbuildings. The store was originally a wooden structure, but in 1889, at about the time when Charleston became Bryson City, Collins had a new 2-story brick building 30 feet wide by 100 feet deep constructed. So, this here is apparently a photo of the old D.K. Collins store on the southeast corner of the square. The store was 16 feet from floor to its varnished chestnut ceiling. The store was described as the handsomest store west of Asheville in 1890. It included solid construction features such as a granite door and window sills. In 1876, when D.K. Collins built his store, he traveled to places as far away as Maryville and Knoxville, both in Tennessee, to purchase merchandise. He traveled over a road down the Tuckasegee and Little Tennessee rivers, crossing the Smoky Mountains, at a point about 3 miles east of the gap through which the latter river flows. That road is long gone today, but more on that later. Interestingly, the first post office so happened to be in the corner of that old D.K. Collins store, with Mr. Collins serving as the postmaster. Later, the post office was moved to some building here along Everett Street. Oh, and telegraph service. It was established in Bryson City in 1884. Yeah, many years before you, as a YouTube watcher, became a human being. You know, though, with his store located not only at the county seat, but in the immediate proximity of the county courthouse, the majority of the county's population would have passed in front of it, if not through its doors, the doors of his store. In addition to his store on Main Street in Bryson City, Collins also owned a store in Yellow Hill, which is now Cherokee. That store was managed by his fellow Ocono-Lufty native T.I. Hughes from around 1890 until just after the turn of the century, when Hughes moved to Bryson City and started his own store diagonally across the town square. The Hughes General Merchandise Store would later become the MC Close Hardware, and today is the NC Clampett Hardware Store. Regarding T.I. Hughes, however, things are going to get a little more bizarre. You see, just across the street, there is this house that holds a deep, lingering secret. Apparently, a restoration project was, and maybe even still is, being taken place that revealed, well, this. This here was found after the removal of layers from the inside of the house. The name T.I. Hughes turned out to be written on the oldest part of the structure. Apparently, this was the Hughes family's primary residence from 1902 until the 1920s, as shown by the census records. You know what that means, folks? That dates this house to around 1902. But things do not just end there for this little house and storefront. As more layers came off, other names were found on newer pieces of the structure. This here is wood between the back part of the house and the main part, and it reads G.I. Calhoun, which would have been Granville Calhoun. Well, folks, let me now turn your attention to this house, the historic Calhoun House. This house, a prominent landmark in Bryson City, was built sometime before 1925, possibly as early as 1904, as a boarding house. According to local legend, the boarders helped to construct the building. It was operated by a number of owners until the Granville Isaiah Calhoun family bought it. Granville Calhoun and his children operated the place as a boarding house and hotel until 1967. Mr. Calhoun, he lived to be 104. Now, Calhoun was a legendary mountain man, renowned for his feats as a hunter, fisherman, and storyteller. He lived in the Hazel Creek area of Swain County, before purchasing the building and renaming it the Calhoun Hotel. At Hazel Creek, he also owned and operated a boarding house, likely this right here, located in the town, or former town, of Proctor, which today is a ghost town, accessible only by boat or a very long hike. It is said by locals that Kephart was a regular visitor to the hotel before Calhoun bought it. It may have been Kephart who told Calhoun of the building and urged him to buy it. Granville Calhoun and the Calhoun Hotel figured prominently in the creation of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Horace Kephart. He was one of the writers who wrote about and promoted the establishment of the park over a period of almost 30 years, from about the turn of the century until his death. Furthermore, the Calhoun Hotel was one of the places leaders in western North Carolina used for a meeting place when planning the establishment of an organization called Western North Carolina Associated Communities. That organization, formed in the late 1940s and early 1950s, led to the development of the Cherokee Historical Association, which started the outdoor drama Unto These Hills, the most successful outdoor drama in the United States. Furthermore, when the Fontana Dam was being built during the 30s and 40s, some of the planning meetings were held right here at the Calhoun. Later, in the 1940s, when construction was underway, some of the leaders found lodging and food right here at the Calhoun. According to local legend, in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, the Calhoun was the only public place in the entire county where white people, black people, and Cherokee Indian people worked together peacefully and profitably without problems or prejudice of any kind. Moving now to this here, which is the location of what was once an old Shell gas station. Typically, a Shell station is not much to brag about. However, this one is. You see, the Shell station located on the town square in 1935 was operated by R.P. Brown, who was driving the vehicle when Horace Kephart and Feasewood Tarleton were killed in the wreck near the mouth of Cooper Creek, likely placing that accident within this area. Okay, folks, we need now to go back to where we left off a while ago, because we jumped ahead. You can blame a couple of buildings for that. But now, we're back in the 1870s. Well, sort of, because I do not have a time machine, but that is when the first, not this thing right here, but the first Swain County Courthouse was completed. Oh, and get a load of this.
So, do you know who Harvey Cooper was? Or
No.
Tom Culvert?
No, I don't.
Wow, I thought you would know something like that. Did you know that Bryson City was the home of a legendary jailbreak?
No.
Well, there was. Let me explain. In 1872, shortly after the completion of the then new jail, a legendary jailbreak occurred when a gang led by Harvey Cooper stormed the jail and freed Tom Culvert, whom they deemed unjustly imprisoned for killing a rival at a saloon in Robbinsville. There were 3 different courthouses built in Bryson City between 1873 and 1908. Oh yes, court was held at the first courthouse until May of 1882, Reportedly, the jailer and his family lived on the west side of the ground floor. The jail was then known as the dungeon, which occupied the east side. The name of dungeon was justified, since there was only one small window. Reportedly, the ceiling was thick with nails to keep the prisoners from sawing their way out. The second floor, it was used for holding court, and also for school and church services. Tradition is said to allege that a fire occurred in the year 1879, creating the need for a new courthouse. So, construction began on that second courthouse in April of 1881, and it was completed just over a year later. Well, that courthouse was completely gutted by a fire on January 3rd of 1908. Now, the site chosen for the third courthouse may have been close, but not in the exact spot. For you see, it was located at a spot on the public square where R.W. Wright's house once stood. The new structure was completed on November 12th of 1908. It was renovated and remains on the square today, though acting nowadays as the local heritage museum. Did you know that Charleston, what this town was originally called, was granted a United States Post Office on February 19th of 1872? And yeah, its first postmaster was none other than D.K. Collins. Well, as you know, the name was changed to Bryson City. That was on March 2nd of 1889. Its postmaster was then, again, D.K. Collins. Oh, and it has been in continuous operation ever since inception. But yes, the locations have changed. We'll get into that a bit later, but right now, the first county election, it was held in June of 1872, with approximately 350 having been cast. In 1880, there were 3,784 persons living in Swain County, and by 1890, the population doubled. Did you know that Bryson City once had dirty little roads? Yeah, it's true. They were often muddy and were not bordered by even a single sidewalk. Later, the front sidewalks were built, with the property owners sharing expenses on a voluntary basis. As a result, some properties had sidewalks, while others had none. There was at that time no stock law, so the roads and sidewalks had livestock running all over them. Yuck. And the early economy of Swain County? It revolved around farming, trading, merchandising, and manufacturing. Of course, as you know, D.K. Collins built the first general store. Lucy Klein and Ep Everett, of course, also had stores with living quarters attached. The three-story frame house of Billy Klein was built on the square, near where the Chamber of Commerce is now located. Did you know that the Murphy branch of the Western North Carolina Railroad delivered thousands of mountaineers from the wilderness of their landlocked hills? A year after the iron rails reached Asheville in 1880, workers scattered to the west of that city, digging, filling, and blasting an extension of the line that stretched 116 miles to Murphy, providing thousands with a path to reach the outside world. And that iron horse, it surely beat riding a wagon, 'cause, before this thing was even here, all travel was by stage, wagons, or horseback. In many ways, though, the young railroad of that time was still primitive. In 1892, a visitor from Chicago described it as little more than two streaks of rust and a right of way. In time, though, those rails would change the way of life for western North Carolina residents. The iron rails brought a flood of salesmen who peddled oil lamps that superseded tallow candles and New England factory cloth to replace scratchy, uncomfortable homespun. From door to door, they sold books, pump organs, enlarged pictures, jewelry, lightning rods, baubles, and who knows what else. Now, the East Tennessee, Virginia, and Georgia Railroad reached Bryson City in 1884, and due to the location of this thing, most of the industries were located on the north side of the river. Passenger business was so good by the turn of the century that 6 passenger trains ran every day between Asheville and Lake Junaluska, and 4 daily between Asheville and Murphy. It was not easy to cut this branch line right here through the mountains. If it had not been for the practical, self-educated engineer captain, J.W. Wilson, a rigidly honest and industrious man, it might not have been accomplished for years. You know, though, this railroad, it was built by convicts working under the gun. There are some stories regarding this railroad that I am not going to go into here, such as the construction of the Cowie Tunnel. There were, however, some gnarly accidents during construction of this railroad. As improvements were made to the railroad, such accidents declined, and before long, the railroad was extended westward, in that direction, through the Nantahala Gorge to Murphy. And there were 4 passenger trains, 2 each way, operating daily between Asheville in that direction and Murphy in that direction. This here, the Murphy branch, experienced its heaviest use during wartime. In the early 1940s, when Fontana Dam was constructed, thousands of carloads of cement, equipment, and other materials ran through town on their way to the construction site. Huge shipments of copper ore from mines in the western reaches of the state, and even Tennessee, only aided to increase the line's tonnage. And in the 1920s, ribbons of concrete began to crawl through the mountains, linking towns together. And so, with the increasing popularity of the automobile, passenger traffic on this here, the Murphy branch, then owned by the sprawling Southern Railway system, began to decline. Southern discontinued all passenger traffic on the Murphy branch on July 16th of 1948, ending a good 64 years of service. When freight traffic dropped off by 1985, Norfolk Southern then closed the Andrews to Murphy leg of the Murphy branch. The state of North Carolina then purchased the Dillsboro to Murphy tracks to keep them from being destroyed. By 1988, many entities had come together to form the Great Smoky Mountains Railway, which then began to run passenger excursions. Rolling stock for the GSMR was purchased from various railroads around the nation. The Dillsboro to Nantahala route was one of the most scenic on the Murphy branch. And so, the excursion trains, they caught on right away. Upward, of 200,000 passengers enjoy the scenery and the experience of a true operational railroad each year aboard passenger excursion trains. American Heritage Railways purchased the Great Smoky Mountains Railroad in December of 1999. The Great Smoky Mountains Railway operates today as the newly organized Great Smoky Mountains Railroad, or at least it was still operating as so in 2021. Now, did you want to know what also happened around 1884? No? Well, that was around the time when the first bridge across the Tuckasegee River was built, so I'm going to tell you anyway. That first bridge, however, was taken out by a flood in 1890. An iron bridge was then built, though it too was replaced in 1918 by an even larger iron bridge. And today, in 2021, I guess this is the bridge you will find there today. It is likely that very same bridge built back in 1918. Well, I thought so at first. Here is a photo of the old Everett Street Bridge. It looks concrete to me, but could hold a wooden roadbed. It's hard to tell from the photo. Regardless, until the coming of the bridge, all crossings in town had to be made by boat. Apparently, for a while after the flood of 1890, crossings were made via a ferry pulled by cables. Reportedly, if someone needed the ferry when it was on the opposite river bank, one had to holler for someone on the other side to pull the cable to bring the boat over to him. You know, though, at first I thought they were talking about the railroad bridge. That's the only iron bridge I see in town. This here, it is not an iron bridge. But I can't see ferries working well with trains, so maybe this bridge here was once made of iron? Let's now move over here to something different. When completed in 1895, there was nothing in Bryson City that could compare with this house here built by Captain Amos and Mrs. Lillian Fry. It was a fitting dwelling for the Frys. He was a prominent attorney and a large landowner, and she was the first woman licensed to practice law in the state. It is a town landmark. It's listed on the Register of Historic Places, you know, the National Register. And you know how that works. The house and inn will get its own episode. But what about this hotel? 'Cause this one, it is not going to be that lucky. You see, it no longer stands, but was reportedly once a prominent landmark in town, the Entella Hotel. Supposedly, the name Entella derives from a Cherokee word meaning lake. So, where was this hotel located? Supposedly, right over there. The Entella Hotel was built on Everett Street opposite the depot about 1888. Unless the depot somehow was moved, then this has to be the location. And the hotel, it operated a lively business for many years, with a wide reputation for excellent meals. An additional wing was added later onto the south side of the building. It was at this very hotel where park commissioners first met with local citizens, including Jack Coburn and Horace Kephart, to discuss the formation of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The building was razed in the 1940s to make way for the Bryson City Coal and Lumber Company. Now, I have a document, a study list, that talks about the D.K. Collins General Store being located on the current site of the First Union National Bank. That bank is positioned on this map at where the circle is drawn. Then, we have this document, a biographical sketch that can be found via the Friends of the Bryson City Cemetery website. This snippet gives a close-by, but different location for the store. In fact, the area described here points to this area on the map. Tell me, where was the store? 'Cause that bank location, is not southeast, and it's sort of northwest, and a bit of a ways west, actually. Furthermore, this comes directly from the page for the Everett Hotel. It says the store was located on the site of the present-day Chamber of Commerce building on Main Street. That is right here, and not at the First Union National Bank site, which is a ways down the road in that direction. Regardless, your attention must now be turned to this right here. It is one of, if not the first building to jumpstart what would become downtown Bryson City. The study list I have refers to it as the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce came later, but historically it should be referred to as the Bryson City Bank Building. The building, built in 1908, housed the Bryson City Bank from 1908 until the early 1960s. The Bryson City Bank was then sold to Northwestern Bank in 1963. And the Northwestern Bank, it moved to, well, okay, so I am sure the D.K. Collins store, it was located where the current Chamber building is. And this here, well, it appears to be First Citizen. So, maybe I got the two screwed up, unless First Union became First Citizen. Not sure if I checked that out earlier or not, but the research now is done. Maybe First Union was a different bank, and located at where the current Chamber building is. Anyhow, let's get back to the building in question. Mr. Stanley W. Black, he headed the bank during its entire tenure in what would become the Chamber building. Following the departure of the bank, the county offices were housed right here in this building until this new county administration building was built. Today, the building acts as the Everett Hotel. Overall, though, what this building is a fine example of a commercial building with strong Italianate elements. The roof is hipped, but yet so low-pitched as to appear almost flat, unless viewed from a distance. It has a balanced rectangular shape, rife with brackets, below a deep cornice. Interestingly, the building is one of the earliest in town, having been a stand-alone prior to the streets having been paved. At about the same time this building was built, a large industry began to take operation a mile or so due west on the Tuckasegee River. I am now standing along a stretch of what was once North Carolina 288, now simply referred to as Bryson Walk. But between this road and the river stands what was once a large wood-turning plant, the Carolina Wood Turning Company. Originally the Bryson City Pump Works, it was in its heyday the only manufacturer making columns from solid logs. The products were apparently in high demand all the way to Massachusetts. Having jump-started in 1903, the business became the Carolina Wood Turning Company in 1925. It was originally located just 100 yards northeast of this here railroad depot, putting it somewhere near the brewery over there. After the name change, the company moved to the north bank of the Tuckasegee River, about a mile below town, right here, along what was then Route 288. Now, the Carolina Wood Turning Company was a prominent furniture manufacturer in the area. The company made wood pump tubing, tanners, liquor logs, various wood trimmings, and solid board colonial porch columns that can still be seen on some county homes. Over the succeeding decades, the company merged with other operations and did business as Magnavox, Cherokee Furniture, Consolidated Furniture, and eventually Singer in 1973, with furniture becoming the principal product. It then operated for a number of years as the Powell Lumber and Kiln Company before shutting down for good in 2013. Apparently, the company had a clock-setting whistle which could be heard blowing lunch and quitting times, as far away as Needmore and Elah. However, obviously, it has been silent for decades. And this here? It is a vintage 1941 photo taken at a time when the company was in full operation. And folks, if your furniture bears the name Cherokee, Consolidated, or North Carolina Wood Turning, then it may well be an artifact. Let's move on to this. So, there is this site named Blind Pig and the Acorn. Don't ask me why that was chosen, I don't know, but it appears to be an online blog of sorts, related to profiles of Appalachian mountain people. Deep in that site, there is this short entry by an Ed Ammons, and it says this. That's the photo! You gotta be kidding me! No, I'm not sure, but I think I might know where that is. In 1906, Robert L. Sandage and Joel Gibson were the two principal developers of Bryson City's first telephone system. Reportedly, in 1987, at the age of 96, Samuel Leonard Gibson, who had a major role in the operation of the Pioneer system, was still living on Kirkland Creek in Swain County, I guess, then somewhere in this area. He went to work for Bob and Joel in 1911. In 1919, he bought a controlling interest in the company and operated it until 1928, when he sold the network to the Western Carolina Telephone Company. In the early days, the company put up a toll line to nearby communities. Reportedly, Southern Bell paid him a percentage of the tolls on calls from Bryson City, 2 points on the Bell system. Okay, so, folks, at one time, and in the mid-1920s, there must have been a 2-story house here on Main Street next to this courthouse. At that time, the local telephone company was located in that house, referred to then as Frank's house, The exchange equipment was installed in a room on the second floor, with Leonard and his family living in the rest of the house. Going back to that ice plant, well, it has been reported that the first ice plant was built in 1912, with people then having ice boxes to keep their milk and butter cool. And if that entry is right, here is the mouth of Shepherd's Creek. Look around and tell me, do you see the remnants of an old ice plant? Here is a photo of the Bryson City Elementary School, reportedly erected in 1924. It was used by all grades until the adjacent building to the north was erected between 1929 and 1930.
So tell me, is this the school you went to?
No, I went to West Elementary in Swain County.
West Elementary?
Yep.
And that's not the building there?
No. Not that I can...
How about you?
I only went to high school here.
So you don't know about that one? Okay, so...
Nope.
Well...
That's not the old Stokoa school.
Actually, no. It is the old elementary school, but it was raised before you were born.
Oh, I was in the...
Now, do you know where Schoolhouse Hill is?
Yeah, that's...
Is that where you went? To the building
That's
up there?
the Swain Middle School I went to.
That's where this building was located.
Reportedly, though, there was a much earlier brick schoolhouse, once erected on the street south of the courthouse, which I guess might mean Main Street. I mean, there is also this street in town called Academy Street. Could that have been it? Well, what is now called Academy appears to once have been called Church, as this Sanborn map from 1937 clearly illustrates. And that school, we're talking late 1800s, folks. As far as that very early long-gone school goes, Union Sunday School and religious services were held there until the Methodists and Baptists built their own churches around 1888 or 1889. In the second floor of that very early school building, it was used by the Masonic Lodge. So tell me, folks, could this have been that early school? In the fall of 1888, the first high school was started with the Reverend George H. Church, with his daughter Laura in charge. And the school, well, it continued until the state took over and new buildings were erected. There must have been yet another school that existed prior to the erection of this thing. Now we have come to this building right here, the Swain Community Hospital. In order to save time and keep this episode down to about an hour and a half, I will let you read these about the hospital on your own time. However, to show you at least some of the grounds, I will add this. The origins of this hospital, they date back to when Aura Christine, a private nurse to Miss Jenk Shank, then president of the North Carolina Wood Turning Company in the 1940s, donated the land where this hospital was built. What about prior to the 1940s? As this map can attest, there was a hospital elsewhere. And that, it brings me to this here building, known historically as a drugstore. It apparently was also referred to as a hospital. It may have acted as a small hospital, holding doctors' offices and stuff. I don't know, as hardly any information on it acting as a hospital can be found. However, its history as a drugstore and the associated physician with starting it is well documented. The Bennett Drug Store. It was built in 1905, founded during that year by a Dr. A. M. Bennett. He purchased the land in 1888 from Thad Bryson. Dr. Bennett's son, Kelly Bennett, became a registered pharmacist in 1912. His daughter, Mary Alice Bennett Greer, became a pharmacist in 1936, and she retired in the late 1990s. In fact, she became the first woman pharmacist in all of North Carolina. Furthermore, Kelly also became known as the Apostle of the Smokies and, along with Horace Kephart, was active in promoting the movement which culminated in the establishment of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Around 2017, when pharmacist Mary Alice Bennett Greer decided to retire, the Bennett Drug Store closed its doors. The closing marked the end of a single family's century-long medical service in a rural mountain county. I think the time has now come to discuss the library. Once again, in order to save time and keep this episode down to about an hour and a half, I will just let you read this about the library. Moving now to here, you should be aware of the Carolina wood-turning plant. But what about the Bryson City Woodworking Company? Well, apparently, this was a company once located on Gibson Street. So, where might Gibson Street be? I will say this, folks. Do not put it in that GPS thingy of yours. It will take you a few miles away to a Gibson Road. Gibson Street, however, has been renamed. And how do I know that? 'Cause it's on this here old Sanborn map from 1937. Today, well, it's just called Island Street. In the mid to late 1940s, after the death of their eldest son with leukemia, plans were made by the family to continue Clarence's hobby in woodworking. So, the back of a building on Gibson Street was rented out. The family moved their 7 pieces of equipment into it and hired their first employee, Don Lee. Then, toys, they began to be made in town under the name of the Bryson City Woodworking Company. As all metal at the time was being used to further the war effort, the company had to rely mostly on wood. This, too, was very hard to obtain, so small pieces were provided via the Carolina Wood Turning Company and the Bryson City Coal and Lumber Company. Eventually, the former site of the Franklin Sawmill and Ice Plant was bought, with the equipment from the old building then being moved into it. The building was 3 stories high, giving the company plenty of room. When the war ended, the name of the company was changed to the Maness Manufacturing Company. I think now is the time to discuss a few of Bryson City's downtown buildings in depth. Why don't we start with this one right here? The building in this photo used to stand right here. Oh yeah, it's gone. It was called the Cooper House. In fact, Horace Kephart, whom you should know a bit of by now, lived in the upstairs room at the right end of the veranda, you know, that enclosed porch kind of thing. This article here, from, I believe, 1953, talks about what happened.
So tell me, do you know where the Waldrop building is?
Afraid I don't.
And that's what you're going to learn about right now. And how does that sound?
Sounds good to me.
Cool.
This here, folks, is the Waldrop building, or the Old Town Hotel building, built in the early 1900s. Horace Keport, yes, his name pops up a lot here, used this location for both lodging and as an office during his time in Bryson City. Interestingly, this location used to be a boarding house and a barber shop. The name of the building comes from a Dr. Waldrop. Dr. Waldrop was a dentist. Well, he added on to the building and moved his office upstairs. At about 1935, Mrs. Cordell operated here a small hotel and boarding house in the building. It's too bad Theo Thudpucker's seafood restaurant is no longer at this location. Here is a photo from 1940. It was the result of a series of storms and a hurricane that dumped more than 20 inches of rain in some mountain areas, and it has gone down in history as the Great Flood of 1940. The photo shows the location of the old post office. Yes, most in the area today will know this building as Everett Street Diner, but apparently it was once the site of the old post office. It would become the office of Nantahala Power and Light only a couple of years after this flood. The two-story frame building just beyond the post office was the home and store space of Civil War veteran John Manos Welch and his family. Here we have a later view from 1949. Notice that the Welch building, his house and store, is now gone. Now, everyone in the area should know this building. It's clearly got Greek Revival elements. The neoclassical Old Pillar Building, or the Citizens Bank Building, was built around 1910. It was the second bank in Bryson City, though it started in a building across the street that once housed the Swain Insurance Agency. And it was one of the early banks to go under during the Great Depression. The bank. It was founded and built by Mr. Rufus Gamewell Coffey. He was a successful lumber, supply, and hardware dealer. Next to the Citizens Bank building, right here, in fact, was once the Fremont Theater, which had been owned by the same attorney that was responsible for the Fremont Inn, Amos Fry. Interestingly, in this ancient photo, the boy holding the rod between the column and the Fremont Theater, he had the rod positioned in such a way to indicate the maximum water level during that 1940 flood. Moving over now to here, the Slayton Fakes Building. It was built circa 1915. It originally housed one of the earliest grocery and dry goods distributors in this region of the country. It was part of a chain operation, and it supplied goods to the lumbering settlements west of Bryson City. Most of the goods were supplied by rail, thus accounting for the location of the building. The building? It too was originally owned by Rufus Gamewell Coffey, and in 1920 it was sold to Slayton Fakes. The Hackney Company, another food distributor, later purchased the building and used it for some years. Then it was sold to private parties and now houses various shops, including Mountain Perks. Rufus Coffey, however, also had ties to the building across the street. The R.G. Coffey Hardware Company was built in 1920. In 1915, he moved his family From Bushnell, which is now buried beneath the waters of Fontana Lake, to Bryson City. In 1920, he built this structure and gave the top floor to the Masonic Lodge. The lodge is no longer present, but on the first floor is where he established his hardware company. Furthermore, Mr. Coffey, he owned most of the land on what is now Gibson Street, where he had lumber mills and supply houses. Now, as you should already know, Gibson Street, it has been renamed to Island Street, in honor of the Island Park, down at its very end. Before we move on to the next building, you need to first look at this deed. It is from 1963. It is a transfer of land from Elizabeth Malouf to Mildred May Arvey. We know from this site that Mildred May Arvey and Mildred May Cope are the same person. Take a look at this deed from 2002. It is a transfer of a portion of that same parcel from Mildred Cope to Chester Bartlett. Look at the name on top of this building. It is the Bartlett Building, showing a year when Bartlett, he had nothing to do with it. So I guess in the early 2000s, some real estate mogul slapped his name on this building and called it his own.
So, did you know that there was a building in Bryson City that was run by a man named Captain Coffin?
No, I did not, but thank you for educating me.
Okay, did you know that there was a building in town? The same building was also once a funeral home. Elmore's Funeral Home.
I don't recall that.
Well, actually, it was the same building. Captain Coffin, though, was a lumber company. Elmore took it over, and then it became a funeral home. So it's kind of an interesting coincidence.
Yeah?
But you do know the building.
Which building is it?
Well, have you ever heard of a man named Dono Layton?
Ah, shit. Actually, before Dono had that tattoo shop, my cousin Amanda Posey had that as a tattoo shop.
Did you know that the building next door was a Belk's at one time? Yes, Bryson City had a Belk.
At one time, Bryson City had a Thudpuckers.
What do you make of a building once operated by a man named Captain Coffin, and then only to be later operated by someone else as a funeral home? Look no further than this building, 'cause that is exactly what happened. Captain Coffin and his wife moved to the area from Maine in the early days of the lumber business. Well, he built this building in the early 1900s. In 1907, he sold the building to Stanley W. Black, who later sold the building to William Edwin Elmore. For many years, this was the Elmore Funeral Home. In later years, apparently, the lower floor served as the bus station. Here is a photo of inside of the building when Ted Hyams had a drugstore. In fact, Ted is pictured in this photo, the second person from the left. The history of this historic building does not end there. Elmore was only the first in a trio. Once upon a time, there was an A&P. Oh, and Bryson City once had a Belk. Who would have known? Which, in this photo, is what that letter B starts to say. Strangely enough, though, part of this building was once owned by members of the Coffey family. Do not get that confused with the early Coffin Lumber Company. This here is Dono Layton, and he owns a tattoo parlor situated in a section of The old Coffin and Elmore building trio. Let's now move over to the house right here, the Charleston Station. This was built in 1920 for Will DeHart. The old DeHart family home was originally built as a 4-bedroom house. Later, he decided to add on to the house and constructed a second floor. He then left town, and by the time he returned, construction had already started on the 3rd floor. He accepted the final result. All of a sudden, he owned a 14-room home. In 1971, Judge Robert Leatherwood purchased the home. And the home, it has since been used as not only a boarding house, but also, at one time, for the Smoky Mountain Area Mental Health Center. In 1986, the Clampett family purchased the home. And in the early to mid-1990s, Charleston Station opened. One of Bryson City's original lamp posts sits in the front yard. Before we move into a bit of a more modern-day discussion of the town, let me first take you on a rather dangerous little road trip. This here is a road in town that is never paved. You see, civilization advanced with the first roads following the courses of streams like this here Tuckasegee River. Remember much earlier in the episode when I was talking about old wagons? In 1827, Jonas Jenkins and others were to lay out a wagon road from the Ocono-Lufty down the Tuckasegee to the mouth of Deep Creek, a stretch of that riverside road, though graveled these days, does come into Bryson City on this north bank alongside the railroad. And that, I hate to say it, is this road, which it floods a lot. Drive here in the rain at your own risk. Okay, now, whitewater rafting began to bring more people to this area. The Great Smoky Mountains Railroad then came to this area. A lot of things are going on, which helped to jumpstart a revitalization of the downtown area. A thorough discussion on the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park requires an episode all its own. Regardless, Deep Creek provides the closest entrance to the park in the nearby Bryson City vicinity. Oh, and apparently, a long time ago, as this picture can attest, there was a dam in this area.
So, you know where the Tunnel to Nowhere is, don't you?
The Road to Nowhere tunnel?
The Road to Nowhere, Tunnel to Nowhere,
It was, it started being worked on in the early 40s and was abandoned a little while later.
During the 1930s and 40s, the areas around Bryson City were given up to create both portions of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and Fontana Lake. Nearly 1,300 people were forced to leave their home sites as a result. Most of these people did not receive any relocation assistance because they refused to accept the buyout and move. In the end, many of them did not receive a dime for their property either.
Where is... Well, first of all, have you ever heard of North Carolina 288? It's a road...
I've heard of it.
Do you know where it is?
It's going to sound silly, but no.
Okay. How about you?
Neither heard of it nor have a clue where.
You've never heard of NC 288?
I don't pay attention to roads. I don't work for NOC anymore.
It's not even close to NOC.
Well, I know, but I don't need to check maps.
Well, you live where?
In the house.
No, I mean on Lemons Branch Road.
I live on Lemons Branch.
What's the road that Lemons Branch connects to? Down there by the river. Yeah.
called, to be honest.
Okay, Bryson Walk.
Hmm.
That's formerly NC 288.
There are dead ends at the docks.
Well, it used to go a long way over to Deal's Gap,
Nice.
but not anymore.
No, that's not.
And here's why.
If you do not know, much of this area north of Fontana Lake, often referred to as the North Shore, was once accessible via Highway 288. You've heard me say it before. Now you can ask, where is that? The westernmost portion of it runs alongside the town of Fairfax, though it was renumbered as 28 in 1954. That is about 50 road miles from Bryson City. But the easternmost portion of it, I am on it right now. If you ever find yourself on Bryson Walk, which is what part of it is called today, then you are on it. And it takes you to the boat docks. 'Cause most of 288 today, it lies under that lake right there. NC 288, it was flooded with the construction of Fontana Dam. Another road was supposed to take its place, which has been called the North Shore Road. Where is that, you might ask? I'm on it right now. If you are from the area, you know it. It's that road that takes you to that tunnel. And here I am at that tunnel. And here, the road simply ends. The story of Highway 288 and the associated tunnel to nowhere could take a half hour alone to explain. Therefore, in order to save time, I will let you read all about it on your own time. Now, to end off this episode, I will provide for you glimpses of the Bryson City Island Park. As we traverse this park, I will say that this has been the episode for Bryson City, an episode condensed into an hour and a half. The original episode, no longer available, is 2.5 hours long. This episode does cut out a few items such as Conmet and Tuckasegee Mills, focusing more on, I guess, the more important historic points. Some items, like the library, hospital, and the road to nowhere, were tapered down and replaced with bits for you to read. All in all, I hope you enjoyed this episode on Bryson City, which holds enough historic info for a few hours worth. I hate to say it, but I have to move on. And as I pack up my stuff and move on, I will let you read a bit about Ironfoot, the Hermit of Island Park.